Hey everybody. So I'm back for another installment. This is sort of an addendum to the last video I shot. There were some comments about the video that were pretty important that I wanted to bring up. People mentioned some things that I didn't talk about in the previous video that you should probably understand. So I'm going to go through some of those things real quick here. And I also want to point out that in my last video, I was running a real expensive key on a real cheap radio. The key is not super important. You can send well with any key, assuming you practice. I mean, I can send okay even with this little lightweight printed circuit board straight key. Obviously, I can't send as good on this as I can on the Bengali. But I mean, if I swap, and I'll swap between the Bengali, let's say on one of these CW Morse paddles, you won't be able to tell the difference. It is nicer to send on this, and the reason I like to use this here is because it is so heavy, it doesn't move around on my desk. This, even with the steel base, tends to move around a little bit, and this guy's super light. This is the one I pack when I go into the woods. So I do just want to briefly talk about some of the things you should probably recognize just by sound. And we'll talk a little bit about recognizing words as opposed to individual letters or dits and das, and that's important. So obviously, one of the first things you need to be able to understand is your own call sign. When somebody calls you, so if you send your call sign to an activator, you need to recognize your call sign when they call back to you. So get used to what your call sign sounds like. Your call sign sounds like. So mine is K2EJT, and I've said it a million times. I know what it sounds like, but I know individual portions of it too. So I might send, and the activator might only catch part of that. If we're working a pile up, and they might only hear the J, so they might come back with a J and a question mark. So it's important to understand the letters and that question mark as well. So they might come back with, oops, right? So J, question mark. So any call sign with a J in it would respond. Not a super common letter in a call sign, so it's probably me. So I respond with my call sign again. But you want to get used to understanding those individual things. You want to know what your call sign sounds like. And you want to know what those individual letters sound like in your call sign. So if they do come back with, let's say they just come back with a 2, and that question mark, they're looking for anybody with a 2 in their call sign. Get used to what that question mark sounds like. It's got a very specific cadence. It rolls out of the machine in a very specific way. Once you hear question mark a few times, you get very used to what it sounds like. You'll recognize it right away. Even if I turn the keyer speed way up, so we'll go to like 27 words a minute. Right, you can still recognize that. Oops. Right, it's still obviously a question mark. So, get used to what some of those things sound like, because you're going to hear question marks a lot. Right, you're going to hear those all the time. And, like I said, even if it's at a speed that you're maybe not necessarily comfortable with, once you know what that character sounds like, you'll recognize it pretty much no matter the speed. All right, the next thing you want to be able to recognize is your own name. A lot of times, activators will be logging you in real time as they get your call, either in something like hammers. So, I mean, I've got hammers open right now, in fact, on my computer here as I'm logging things. So they might log you in something like hammers. So if I put my call sign in here, right? So if I punch my call sign in, so I'm going to do this without a glare. So if I punch my call sign in, it comes up and tells me who I am, okay? So they may be logging you in real time. So they may come back at you with your first name. They might come back to me. My first name's Evan, so they might come back. Oops. Man. All right, that's my first name. Ooh, man, it's rough today. And I'm not going to edit out any of these mistakes, because that's what real life is like. When you hear stuff on the air, you're going to hear a whole lot of these. All right, people are going to make mistakes left and right. I'm not going to edit them out, because this is how it really is in real life. So get used to what your name sounds like, because quite often they'll come back to you. They might say, thank you, and then your first name. So get used to what that sounds like as well. And obviously that's going to be different for everybody. Another thing that you want to get used to the sound of is the word again, or the abbreviation for again, which is AGN. You're going to hear that a lot on the air as well. Let me turn this volume up on this just a little bit. You're going to hear again a lot if they want you to repeat something. A lot of times, instead of sending a question mark, they might send again, which is just, whoop. All right, that's again. and get used to what that sounds like. You're going to hear that a lot. And if you recognize it as a word, as opposed to having to hash out individual letters, it's going to come a lot more naturally to you. If you know that that's what again sounds like, you're going to understand when somebody comes back to you, they want you to repeat, for instance, your call sign. Right? I know that's again. Another one you'll hear a lot is QSL. Turn the keyer speed down a little bit. So QSL is one you're going to hear a lot. All right, QSL. All right, you're going to hear that a lot. QSL, you might hear it both as yes, I understood, or you might hear QSL question mark, like they want to know, did you copy what I sent you? You'll hear them send QRZ. So if they're looking for calls when they finish their last QSO, if nobody calls back immediately, instead of calling CQ, they might just call QRZ. All right, and they might follow that with a question mark too. And then that means they're looking for contacts. Go ahead and call, send your call sign. You'll hear RST. Man, I'm having a rough time today. All right, RST. Again, if they didn't hear the signal report, they might come back and ask for that. All right, RST. And get used to what those things sound like as individual words. Another thing you want to pay attention to is when they come back with the RST, you might hear them send 5NN or 599. Don't let that throw you. You know, if you hear that's 5NN, which means 599, they may come back with, oops. All right, they may come back with actual 599. So again, what you want to do is get used to what those individual things sound like. And like I said, try to hear it as a complete word. So when you hear you are, instead of hearing the letters U and R, think you're. Man. All right, that means you are. When I know that you are something, something. All right. Or maybe thank you. All right, you get used to what that sounds like. And one thing you do need to watch is sometimes people won't leave the space in there. So thank you may come out like an X. All right, you may hear that. What they're actually sending most likely is thank you. That's one thing you'll struggle with is if people don't have the greatest fist or if they're rushing and they're not putting enough space in there in between the letters or in between the words, you might not copy what they said. You might hear one thing when they meant something else. You know, obviously you want to know what 7-3 sounds like. You know that that's 7-3. They're saying, okay, we're done. Things like good morning, good afternoon, good evening. We talked about that in the last video. Right, good afternoon. Get used to what those things sound like. Like I said, you kind of want to get used to what things sound like as words as opposed to individual dits and das or individual characters. Don't count dits and das. Try to work away from hearing individual letters. Now, if you're in a rag chew and somebody's sending you things that, you know, they're sending you longer words, it may be hard to word copy those things. But in these real fast QSOs and things like POTA or SOTA or contests or field day, things like that, there are so few things you really need to be able to recognize that it's not that hard to learn what they sound like, to the point where you might only be able to copy, let's say 12 words a minute in a rag chew, but you might be able to work a SOTA station at 30 words a minute because you know what these individual words sound like. So like I said, I just kind of wanted to show you guys that, you know, key doesn't matter. I can send with any of these keys. I can put this $30 CW Morse key on here and, right, it doesn't matter. They all sound the same. Nobody can tell what key you're keying on. Like I said, I'm just using this Bengali because it doesn't move around on my desk as much. So key isn't super important. The important things are practice consistently, push yourself. Keep moving your speed higher and higher. If you're copying things at 100% accuracy every time you're practicing, you're not practicing hard enough. You should be missing things. The key itself is not super important. The key operator is more important. So don't worry about spending a ton of money on a key. I personally prefer iambic paddles, but I can send with a straight key just fine too. And like I said, get used to what individual things sound like. Get used to what your own personal first name sounds like. Understand, be able to recognize your call sign, and be able to recognize it at pretty serious speed. No question marks. You're going to hear them all the time. All right. Get used to things like again and QSL and QRZ and RST, 599, 5NN, UR, thank you, 73, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, those kind of things. If anybody else has any other things that they think I should probably include, go ahead and throw those in the comments. And when I shoot the next one, I'll try to include some of those. Like I said, I'm going to try this Saturday or Sunday to hop on the air and try to hunt some parks, especially ones that I got some pretty big pileups going on. So you guys can kind of see what it's like to actually try to jump in and get through to some of those parks. It can be a little frustrating trying to get your call sign in there so they can hear it. So I'll talk about some tips and tricks for that as well. But like I said, if you've got any comments, feel free to leave them in the description. Otherwise, I appreciate you watching. Hopefully it was helpful, and I'll see you in the next one.